Well, joining us to discuss this is Dr. Alan Mendoza, co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome to the programme, Dr. Mendoza. First of all, are we now seeing, it seems like this is something that has ramped up in the last few months. Are we seeing a greater degree of terrorism in and around and associated with this country now than we have done in previous years?
Well, the answer to that, Tom, is complicated because it's both a yes and no answer. On the one hand, we're obviously seeing more activity, but you've got to remember that's come off the back essentially of 2 years of hibernation when people were, locked up for various reasons. Locked down, I should say, not locked up, but, that sort of line. It was difficult to really get out there and do things. But in that time, we know there's been a lot of online radicalisation of extremism of all kinds, people being influenced by things they've seen, perhaps by the very few members of local communities they've met with. And as a result, that has sparked itself now into what is beginning to look like an orgy of violence coming out. However, the longer term issue on this is, if you cast your mind back a few years, we've had repeated and constant terrorist threats from this and other angles, but particularly from radical Islam. And that hasn't been, that's not going to go away anytime soon either. So it's both a long-term problem and a short-term problem.
It's interesting to me, this story that emanated out of Texas, the idea that this man was British and not coming from any other country. Does Britain itself, does the United Kingdom have a problem here that's not being experienced in other countries? Are we sort of especially incubating this sort of global terrorism?
Again, I wouldn't say especially, because this form of global terrorism is witnessed, in many different countries. We'll have obviously seen just, across the Channel, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Many other countries have had similar problems of dealing with, kind of Islamist ideology and when it turns into violence. I think obviously we have a particular issue here because over the last few years, this has become the sort of problem that dare not speak its name. There's been such a chilling effect from people who hurl terms of racism and Islamophobia at people who raise legitimate concerns about what might be happening at this angle, that it's sort of been pushed away from the policy agenda. The reality is, we do have a problem here. It's a particular problem in the UK because we haven't tackled it. And there are numerous ways to tackle it, but that requires a commitment in our political system to tackle it.
So what would be, finally, some of those suggestions from you in terms of how we could tackle this? We're hearing about Operation Red Meat this week, that the government wants to try and pursue some policy, finally. What policies would you suggest?
Well, I think the good news about this is that the policy is already there, waiting to be dusted off the shelves. To give you one example, the Casey Review, which was produced a few years ago by Dame Louise Casey, looking at what was going on in various parts of the country when it came to integration, found some very worrying results and gave clear suggestions on how that could be improved, such as looking at, sort of desegregating areas, looking at improving women's rights, looking at teaching English, matters like that, many other things as well. So there's a whole slew of policy recommendations sitting there. Sarah Khan, when she was at the Extremism Commission, did something similar. We have a forthcoming review from William Shawcross on Prevent and what's gone wrong with that programme. Clearly, there are plenty of policy options there which don't need a lot of thought about it. It just needs someone to say, right, we're going to enact them.
Well, Dr. Alan Mendoza of the Henry Jackson Society, thank you for joining us for this conversation. I think it is a very important conversation to have, and sadly, so often politics pushes it to the side. But thank you for joining us this morning to discuss that. Hopefully, that will be taken on by ministers. Well,